In the gilded ballrooms of Mayfair, sight is the primary currency. The sparkle of a diamond, the cut of a coat, the judgmental arch of a powdered brow. But for Captain Rhys Vaughan, the world ended in a flash of French gunpowder, leaving him in a realm of velvet shadows and sharpened echoes. At the listening ball, where masks hide more than faces, and the music speaks what the tongue dares not, he encountered a woman whose voice was a sanctuary, and whose touch was a transgression. This is not a story of what is seen, but of what is felt in the darkness between heartbeats. If you find yourself lost in this tale of fire and truth, subscribe for the next chapter. Tell us in the comments, would you choose duty or desire? The carriage ride to the Grosvenor Square mansion had been a symphony of irritations for Captain Rhys Vaughan. The rhythmic jolt of the wheels against the cobbles vibrated through his cane, and the scent of damp wool and stale tobacco from his companion, Lord Stirling, was a cloying reminder of the world he could no longer see, but was forced to inhabit. "It's a listening ball, Rhys, quite the vogue this season," Stirling chirped, his voice thin and overly bright, the way people spoke when they were trying to compensate for a man's missing senses. "The lighting is dimmed to a mere amber glow. Sympathy for the veterans, you see. Masks are mandatory. It's all very mysterious, very ton." "It sounds like a collection of hens clucking in a dark cellar," Rhys rambled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that still carried the authority of the 52nd Light Infantry. He stepped out of the carriage, his boots finding the pavement with a practiced, heavy click. He hated the pity of the light, but he hated the charity of the dark even more. To the world he was a broken hero, a lion with his eyes put out, fit only for sitting by a fire and nodding at the stories of others. The ballroom was a different beast entirely. As he entered, the heat hit him first, a wall of expensive beeswax candles, French perfume, and the humid breath of 300 people. But Stirling hadn't lied about the music. A small chamber orchestra was playing a Mozart divertendo, the violins weaving a shimmering thread through the low hum of conversation. Rhys moved to the periphery, his back finding a cold stone pillar. He didn't need eyes to feel the glances, the way the air shifted when people realized the tall, scarred man in the midnight blue coat was the blind captain. He adjusted his black silk mask, which covered the upper half of his face, shielding the clouded remnants of his sight from the world's curiosity. Then he heard her. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a laugh, a low, melodic ripple that cut through the shrill soprano of the debutantes, like a cello through a flock of whistles. It came from his left, near the refreshment table. "I assure you, Mr. Gable, if I eat another lemon ice, I shall simply turn into a citrus fruit and roll out the door," she said. The voice was rich, textured with a slight huskiness that suggested secrets kept and stories told by candlelight. Rhys found himself leaning forward, his head tilting instinctively. "The captain is intrigued," a voice murmured beside him. He didn't know the woman who had approached, but she smelled of sandalwood and something sharper, ink perhaps. "I am merely appreciative of a woman who doesn't sound like a startled bird," Rhys replied smoothly. "That is Miss Lydia," the woman whispered, "a woman of particular talents and an even more particular spirit. Shall I introduce you, or do you prefer to hunt by ear alone?" "I am no hunter, madam. I am a ghost." "Then perhaps you should speak to her. She has a way of making ghosts feel quite substantial." Rhys felt a gloved hand guide his arm. He considered pulling away. His pride was a jagged thing these days. But the melodic laugh sounded again, closer now, and the pull was magnetic. "Miss Lydia, may I present Captain Rhys Vaughan? Captain, Miss Lydia." "A captain?" Her voice was closer now. He could feel the warmth of her presence. "And does the captain find the music to his liking, or is it too dissident for a man of action?" Rhys bowed, the movement stiff but elegant. "The Mozart is acceptable, though I suspect the cellist is bored. He's dragging his bow on the transitions." He heard a soft gasp of delight. "He is? I thought I was the only one who noticed. He's been eyeing the champagne tray for the last 20 minutes." "I find," Reese said, stepping closer, "that when the world goes dark, the truth of things becomes much louder. Is it dark for you now, Captain, even with the candles?" "It is always dark, Miss Lydia. But your voice, it has a colour, something like deep amber." The silence that followed was thick, charged with a sudden, breathless tension. He could hear her breathing, a soft, rhythmic hitch. "And yours," she whispered, her voice dropping to a level intended only for him, "is the colour of a stormy sea, powerful, restless, and perhaps a little dangerous." They drifted away from the crowd, guided by the pull of their conversation. They spoke of things Reese hadn't discussed in years, not the war, not the pain, but the architecture of sound. They talked of the way a violin could mimic a human cry, and how the silence of a library felt different from the silence of a forest. He reached out, his fingers brushing the silk of her sleeve. It was a bold move, one that should have been rebuked, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she moved closer, her hand coming to rest on his forearm. Through the thin wool of his coat, her touch felt like a brand. "You aren't what I expected of this evening," she murmured. "And what did you expect? A collection of broken men to be pitied?" "I expected shadows," she said, her voice vibrating with a sudden fierce intensity. "I did not expect to find a man who sees more in his darkness than most men see in the noonday sun." The clock began to strike. 1, 2, the midnight hour. The orchestra shifted, launching into a slow, haunting waltz. Around them, the rustle of silk intensified as couples took to the floor, but Reese and Lydia remained in their corner of shadows. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a request. "The captain doesn't fear a collision?" "I will trust you to be my eyes, Lydia, just for this." She stepped into his arms, and the world narrowed to the scent of her hair, night-blooming jasmine, and the firm, steady pressure of her hand in his. They moved with a surprising, fluid grace. He didn't need to see the floor. He felt the rhythm of her body, the sway of her skirts against his legs. As the final chime of midnight echoed through the hall, the music reached a crescendo and faded into a lingering, resonant hum. They stopped. They were near a heavy velvet curtain leading to the terrace. The air was cooler here, smelling of rain and stone. Reese's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, as his thumb traced the line of her jaw, finding the soft skin just below the edge of her mask. "I don't even know what you look like," he whispered. "Does it matter?" she replied, her breath warm against his lips. "In this room, we are whatever we choose to be." "I choose this," he groaned. He leaned down, guided by the scent of jasmine and the magnetic pull of her presence. When his lips met hers, it wasn't the polite kiss of a ballroom. It was a collision, a desperate, starving thing. She tasted of champagne and sweetness, and she met his hunger with a fierce, surprising passion of her own, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. For a moment, the darkness wasn't a prison, it was a sanctuary. She pulled away first, a sharp intake of breath the only warning. "I must go," she whispered, her voice ragged. "Wait, Lydia." But the silken rustle of her gown was already receding. He reached out, his hand grasping only the cold, empty air. The scent of jasmine lingered, a haunting ghost in the amber light, leaving him more alone in the dark than he had ever been before. The following fortnight was a slow torture of echoes. Every time a carriage clattered past the Vaughan townhouse, Reese found himself tilting his head, straining to catch the lilt of a laugh that never came. He had returned to the listening ball in spirit 1,000 times, dissecting the memory of that midnight waltz until it was nothing more than a frayed tapestry of sensation. He had spent a small fortune on discreet inquiries, but Lydia was a name as common as the London fog, and the woman who had tasted of champagne and jasmine had vanished into the amber shadows that birthed her. "You are brooding again, Reese. It's terribly unfashionable," his sister, Lady Augusta, remarked as she swept into his study. The scent of her expensive violet water preceded her, a pale, thin imitation of the richness he sought. "I am not brooding, Augusta. I am resting my eyes," Reese replied dryly, his fingers tracing the erratic grain of the mahogany desk. You are scowling at the fireplace as if it personally offended your ancestors. You need a distraction. Since you refuse to return to the social circuit, I have brought the neighbours to you, or rather their new employee. Reese stifled a groan. I do not require a governess, Gussie. I am 32, not 6. Don't be thick. The Marchmonts have engaged a new young woman for their brood, and she is a marvel with a book. Mrs. Marchmont mentioned she was looking for extra work to supplement her pittance, and I thought, since your secretary has the personality of a damp rag, she might read your correspondence to you. The door creaked, and a new presence entered the room. Reese's pulse gave a treacherous, involuntary spike, then settled into a dull thud. This woman did not smell of jasmine. She smelled of starch, cold rain, and the faint medicinal tang of lye soap. Captain Vaughan, a voice said. It was steady, professional. It lacked the flirtatious lilt of the ballroom, the breathless huskiness of the terrace. This was the voice of a woman who knew her place in the world's rigid hierarchy, somewhere between the silver plate and the cellar. Miss Thorne, my lord, Augusta introduced. Reese gave a curt nod. Miss Thorne, my sister seems to think I am incapable of handling paper without a chaperone.
I believe Lady Augusta merely thinks that some words deserve a better vessel than a damp rag, sir, the governess replied. There was a spark there, a dry, quiet wit, but it was buried under layers of perceived propriety. Very well. Sit. Read, Reese commanded, gesturing vaguely toward the armchair across from him. He heard the soft rustle of a wool gown, a heavy, sensible fabric, not the gossamer silk he remembered. She sat, and the sound of a letter being unsealed was sharp in the quiet room. As she began to read the mundane reports from his estate in Wales, Reese felt a strange, nagging familiarity. It wasn't the sound exactly. Miss Thorne's tone was clipped, her vowels precise, but the cadence, the way she paused before a particularly descriptive passage about the harvest, as if she was savouring the imagery. The northern paddock is seeing a surplus of clover this season, she read, and the light over the valley is described by the steward as a bruised purple, like a plum before the frost. She stopped, a small huffed breath escaping her. Is something wrong, Miss Thorne? Reese asked, his sightless eyes fixed on the space where her face should be. No, sir. It's just, your steward has the soul of a poet. Most estate reports are as dry as hardtack. Do you enjoy poetry, Miss Thorne? I enjoy the truth, Captain, and the truth is often found in the way the light hits a thing. Reese leaned back, his interest piqued despite his obsession. Tell me then, describe this room to me, and do not give me the inventory of a bailiff. Tell me what you see. There was a long silence. He could hear the ticking of the clock, the hiss of the coal in the grate. Then she spoke.
The light is failing, sir. It's that blue hour where the shadows grow long and thin, like the fingers of a pianist. The gold leaf on your book spines is catching the last of the sun, turning the shelf into a row of glowing teeth. Your desk is a battlefield of ink stains and discarded quills, and you, she hesitated, and I? You look like a man carved from oak, sitting in a room that is far too small for him. There is a smudge of ink on your left cuff, and the firelight is playing across your scars, making them look like silver lace. Reese froze. The description was visceral, devoid of the flinching pity he usually sensed. She saw the scars not as a disfigurement, but as a texture. You have a singular way of looking at the world, Miss Thorne, he said softly. It is a requirement of my position, Captain, to see everything and be seen by no one. For a fleeting second, the air between them vibrated with the same electric charge he had felt on the terrace. The starch and the lye soap seemed to fade, replaced by a ghost of a memory, a touch, a laugh, a midnight promise. But then she stood, the movement crisp and final. I have finished the correspondence, sir. Shall I return at the same time tomorrow?
Rhys clutched the arms of his chair. He wanted to ask her name, her real name. He wanted to reach out and see if her jawline matched the one his thumb had traced in the bark. But the propriety of the Victorian afternoon was a far more formidable mask than any silk disguise. "Yes," he said, his voice sounding more like a growl than he intended. "Tomorrow. And bring something other than estate reports. I find I have a sudden appetite for colour." As she left, the room felt abruptly, devastatingly grey. He sat in the gathering dark, wondering why the governess next door made his heart ache with the exact same rhythm as the woman he had lost. The air in the Marchmonts' drawing room was thick with the scent of lilies and the stifling heat of too many bodies pressed into a space designed for half their number. It was a music-hall, that most tedious of social obligations, where the ton gathered to listen to mediocre piano concertos while mentally tallying the cost of their neighbour's lace. Rhys sat in the front row, his cane hooked over his knee, his expression a mask of bored endurance. He had come only because Augusta had insisted that Miss Thorne would be performing a piece with the Marchmont children, and he found, to his own irritation, that he was hungry for the sound of the governess's voice. In the week she had spent reading to him, she had become a quiet fixture in his mind, a steady, cool presence that somehow balanced the frantic, burning memory of the woman from the ball. The children finished a stumbling rendition of a Mozart sonata to polite, brittle applause. Then a hush fell. "And now," Mrs. Marchmont announced, her voice dripping with the patronizing pride of a patron, "Miss Thorne has consented to share a song. She is quite the find, I assure you." Rhys leaned back, his muscles tensing. Then she began to sing. It wasn't a parlour ditty. It wasn't the light, airy soprano of a girl looking for a husband. It was a rich, dark mezzo-soprano that rose from the depths of the soul. The song was a haunting, melancholic lament in Italian, something from the opera, far too sophisticated for a governess in a starch-stiffened collar. The first note hit Rhys like a physical blow. The world around him, the rustle of silk, the clatter of teacups, the smell of lilies, simply ceased to exist. It was her. The amber voice, the stormy sea, the woman who had tasted of jasmine and midnight. Every hair on his arm stood up. The betrayal was a sudden, jagged blade in his gut. She had sat in his study for hours, watching him, reading to him, seeing his scars and his struggle, all while holding the very thing he was dying for just behind her teeth. As the final note vibrated in the air, leaving the room in a stunned, breathless silence, Rhys stood up. He didn't wait for the applause. He didn't wait for Augusta. He navigated the room with a terrifying, predatory precision, his cane striking the floor like a drumbeat. "Miss Thorne," he barked as he reached the piano. He heard her sharp intake of breath, the same hitch he had heard on the terrace. "Captain," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The garden," he commanded. "Now." He didn't wait to see if she followed. He knew she would. The gravity between them was too strong to break. Outside, the air was sharp with the scent of coming rain. Rhys stopped near a stone fountain, the splashing water a chaotic backdrop to the roar in his ears. He turned as he heard the soft, hurried footsteps on the gravel. "Why?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You sat in my house. You looked into my face. You knew I was hunting for you. You knew I was haunted by that night. And you said nothing." "I could not," she said. And now the voice was stripped of her governess's mask. It was raw, bleeding with emotion. "I am a governess, Rhys. I live on the charity of families who value nothing more than a spotless reputation. If it were known that I was the woman at that ball, that I had danced and kissed a man in the dark like a common lito-love, I would be on the street by morning." "You are no common anything, and you know it." He stepped toward her, his height towering over her, his presence a suffocating weight. "That voice, that is not the voice of a governess. Where did you learn to sing like that? Why are you hiding in the shadows of a schoolroom?" Lydia let out a harsh, jagged laugh. I was Lydia Valenti. Does that name mean anything to your English ears? I sang at the San Carlo in Naples. I sang for kings. But in this country, a woman who stands on a stage and bears her soul for money is viewed as little better than a high-class mistress. When my father died and the debts came due, I had a choice: find a protector to keep me in silks and shame, or bury the singer and become a ghost in a grey gown. I chose the gown. You lied to me, Rhys said, his voice cracking. The pain of the deception was worse than the darkness. You let me believe you were a dream I'd invented. I was protecting myself, she cried, and he felt her hand brush his chest before she pulled it back as if burned. I saw how you looked at the world, Rhys. You are a man of honour, of rigid lines and soldierly truth. How could I tell you that the woman you kissed was a failed opera singer with a tarnished name? You would have looked at me with the same pity everyone else does, or worse, you would have looked at me with appetite. You think so little of me, he reached out, his hand finding her shoulder, his grip firm. You think I am so blinded that I cannot tell the difference between a costume and a soul. I think you are a man who has lost much, she whispered, her voice breaking, and I did not want to be one more thing you had to lose.
The rain began to fall then, huge, heavy drops that soaked into his wool coat and her thin cotton dress. But Rhys did not move. He stood in the downpour, holding the woman who was both his greatest comfort and his most bitter betrayal, the music of her voice still ringing in his ears like a battle cry. The rain was no longer a drizzle. It had become a relentless percussion against the stone statues of the Marchmont garden, a cold, drumming weight that threatened to wash away the last of the evening's pretences. Rhys did not pull her toward the house. Instead, he drew her into the shadow of a small, ivy-choked summer house, the air inside smelling of damp earth and old, forgotten summers. He released her shoulder, but the space between them remained charged, a physical ache. "Do you know why I truly hate the dark, Lydia?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of the storm. "It isn't the loss of the sky or the faces of my friends. It is the way it makes a man's memory grow claws." He turned away from her, his hand finding the rough wooden lattice of the summer house. In the peninsula, near the border of France, there was a woman, a singer like you. She had a voice that could make a man forget he was standing in a graveyard. She sang for our officers, songs of home, of mothers, of peace. We called her the Nightingale. He felt the old, jagged cold of the Pyrenees creeping into his bones. She was a spy. Every night she sang, she was counting our numbers, mapping our weaknesses. Because I trusted the beauty of her voice, I led my men into a pass that became a slaughterhouse. My eyes were the price of that particular melody. He turned back toward her, his sightless gaze fixed somewhere above her head, clouded with the ghosts of 1813.
"When I heard you tonight, the world didn't just open up, it shattered. I felt that same sickening slip of the heart. I thought, God help me, I have let another siren lure me onto the rocks." "Rhys!" Lydia's voice was a soft, broken chord. She stepped into his space, her damp skirts brushing his boots. She took his hand, the one that had been gripping the lattice, and forced him to feel the warmth of her palm. "I am not a spy. I am not a weapon. My voice was never a trap. It was my only bridge to a world that didn't want me." She pulled his hand up, pressing his palm against her cheek, then her throat, where the pulse thrummed like a trapped bird. "The nightingale used her gift to destroy," she whispered. "I used mine to survive. When I sang at that ball, I wasn't trying to deceive you. I was trying for one night to be the woman I actually am, rather than the shadow the world demands I be. I didn't fall in love with a captain at that ball, Rhys. I fell in love with a man who heard the music in my silence. The silence that followed was longer than the years of his blindness. The rain hammered on the roof, but inside the summer house, the air grew heavy and still. Rhys felt the texture of her skin, the dampness of the rain, the heat of her blood, the slight tremble of her jaw. Suddenly, the colour he had sensed in her voice moved through him like a flood. He realized that his fear wasn't of her, it was of his own capacity to feel this much again. The nightingale had taken his sight, but if he pushed Lydia away, he would be the one to extinguish the light.
He reached out with his other hand, his fingers tracing the curve of her ear, the damp silk of her hair, the line of her throat. He wasn't searching for a ghost anymore. He was mapping a reality far more profound than anything he had ever seen with his eyes. "I have spent 3 years in a tomb," he said, his voice thick with a sudden raw clarity. "But tonight, in that drawing room, when you hit that high, mournful C, I didn't see a singer, I didn't see a governess, I saw you. Not the mask, not the gown, not the reputation. I saw the soul of a woman who refuses to be broken by a world that doesn't deserve her." He stepped closer, closing the final inch between them until their foreheads rested against each other. "Lydia Thorne, or Lydia Valenti, it makes no difference to a man who sees with his heart. I do not want the nightingale. I want the woman who reads me estate reports with the soul of a poet. I want the woman who tasted of jasmine and defiance." He felt her breath hitch, a sob caught in her throat. "I cannot go back to being a ghost, Reese," she whispered. "Then don't," he commanded, his voice a low, fierce vow. "Be my wife. Be the mistress of a house that will never ask you to be silent. Sing for me, or never sing another note as long as you live, but do it by my side. I see you, Lydia. I see you more clearly than I have ever seen anything in my life." He didn't wait for her to answer with words. He claimed her mouth with a kiss that was a surrender and a victory all at once. In the dark of the summer house, amidst the scent of rain and rising hope, the captain was no longer a veteran of a finished war. He was a man beginning a new one, a battle for a life lived in the brilliant, blinding light of the truth. True sight has little to do with the eyes. It is the courage to reach into the darkness and find the hand that was meant to hold yours. For Reese and Lydia, the music didn't end when the ball was over. It simply changed key, becoming the quiet, enduring song of two souls who finally found a home in the silence.